The flag they handed me at the gate was not ours, and that was the whole of it. I had stood 100 ceremonies in my years as an officer of the household, and I had never once been asked to carry another country's grief across my own ground. But the orders were plain, signed and sealed by the Lord Chamberlain himself, and they read like a thing out of an older world. A fallen soldier of the Republic of Serving, killed in a flood while bringing the trapped out of a drowned village, was to pass through our kingdom on his last journey home. His own coast lay 3 seas distant, the only road that could receive his coffin from the relief ships and send it on by air ran through our capital, through the long forecourt of the old mews, where my men stood their watch. For 4 hours the body of a man I had never met, of a nation I had visited once and barely, would rest under our roof. And I was to render him full honors, not a courtesy, not a polite half-measure, full state honors, the bearer party, the slow march, the rifles reversed, everything we would give one of our own sons. I will tell you honestly what I felt when I read that order, because a man who pretends he felt only nobility is a liar, and I have no use for liars at a coffin. What I felt first was the small, mean voice that lives in every soldier. He is not ours. Let his own people carry him. We have our own dead to honor, and few enough hours to honor them in. I folded the order, and I put that voice away where it belonged, because I knew already what I would do with the men under me. I would teach them the opposite of that voice before the sun came up. The morning came gray, the way the best of our mornings do, not raining, but holding the rain, the stone of the forecourt dark with the night's damp, the gilded rails beaded and dull. I had chosen my detail the evening before, 8 men for the bearer party and 1 to stand the vigil at the head. The vigil was the harder duty. To carry is to move, and a moving man can hide a great deal behind the work of his hands. To stand at the head of a stranger's coffin and not move, to give a dead foreigner your stillness as though it were owed, that is the duty that finds out a man's heart. So I gave it to the one whose heart I trusted most. I gave it to Corporal Aldous Wren. You will not have heard of Wren, and he would prefer it that way. He was a long, spare man with a face that gave nothing away and eyes that missed nothing, and he had come to the household after years I was not permitted to ask about and he was not permitted to tell. He had buried men. I knew that the way you know weather is coming. He never spoke of it, and he never needed to. It was in the particular care he took with a folded cloth, with a name said correctly, with the small dignities that careless men trample and careful men guard. When I told him the post, the head of the coffin, 4 hours, full honors for a son of Servin, he did not ask why. He asked one thing only. His name, sir, Wren said. I'd like to know his name. I told him. Corporal Teo Vassery of the Serving Republican Engineers, 26 years old. He had gone back into the water 4 times, the dispatch said, and brought out 4 families, and on the 5th time the water had not given him back. Wren repeated the name once, quietly, the way you set a thing on a high shelf so it will not be knocked down. Then he said, "Then we'll do it properly," and that was the whole of his speech on the matter, and it was enough. We had a complication, and I had better tell you about it now, because it is the reason the morning went the way it did. The Republic of Serving sent an escort. That was right and expected. A fallen soldier travels with his own, but the man they sent was not a comrade of Vassery's. He was an attaché from their embassy, a tall, glossy official named Doral Kesp, and he arrived in a long car 20 minutes before the cortege with the air of a man inspecting a venue he suspected would disappoint him. I met him at the gate. He looked past me at my men forming up on the wet stone, and the first words out of his mouth set the tone of everything he would say for the next 4 hours. "I hope," Kesp said, "that your people understand this is to be brief. We are grateful, of course, but Corporal Vassery is ours. The honors that matter will be rendered at home by his own regiment before his own flag. What happens here is, he searched for the word and found the one he wanted, transit, a formality. Let us not pretend it is more than it is. I have learned in a long career that the men who say a thing is only a formality are very often the men most frightened of being moved by it. I did not argue with him. I said, "Understood, sir," and I meant, "Understood that you do not yet know what you are about to see." I walked him to the place I had set for the receiving party under the colonnade where the light was kindest, and I left him there with his folded hands and his certainty, and I went back to my men. The cortege came up the long approach at a walking pace, and the forecourt went quiet the way a room goes quiet when something true enters it. No one had to call for silence. The few of the public who had gathered at the rails, they always gather, they always know, took off their hats without being told. A bell somewhere in the city was tolling, slow, and I remember thinking it had no business being that exactly right. The coffin was draped in the flag of Serving, pale blue, a white river device, a gold star. Not our colors, not anything my men had drilled their whole lives to honor. I watched their faces as the bearer party stepped forward to receive it from the cortege, and I will tell you what I saw, because it is the first thing in this story that made my throat tighten. I saw 8 men of the household look at a flag that was not theirs, and I saw not one flicker of that small mean voice I had felt the night before. They received that coffin onto their shoulders as if it weighed as much as a king's, because to them, in that moment, it did. And Wren took his place at the head. He had been standing the vigil position for less than a minute when Kesp, the attaché, leaned to the liaison beside him and said, not quite quietly enough, "He needn't stay rigid the whole while. It's 4 hours. Tell him he may stand at ease when the cameras aren't on it. No one will think less." The liaison, an anxious young man from our own protocol office, came to me with the message because he did not dare take it to Wren. I told him to deliver nothing. I told him Corporal Wren knew his duty, and would not be improved by advice from a man who thought honor was a thing you performed for cameras and put down when they looked away. But I watched Wren after that, because I am his officer and it is my business to watch. And I understood, standing in the gray morning with a stranger's coffin between us and a glossy man under the colonnade who thought this was a formality, that the next 4 hours were going to be a contest. Not a loud one. The quietest contest I had ever stood near. On one side, a man who believed a foreign soldier's death was an inconvenience to be processed and forgotten by lunch. On the other, a corporal who had decided to give that dead stranger every ounce of honor in his disciplined body, for no reason on earth except that it was right. I did not yet know how Wren meant to win it. I only knew that he had already begun. The coffin was set upon the catafalque we had draped in black the night before, in the center of the forecourt, under the open gray sky. Wren stood at the head, his rifle reversed and grounded, his chin down upon his hands in the old attitude of the vigil, motionless. 3 more of my men took the other 3 points, the same posture, the same stillness. They would change every 20 minutes, slow marching off and slow marching on with a precision that made the relief itself a kind of honor. But Wren would not change. He had asked to stand the head for the full 4 hours, and I had let him, because some men carry a thing better when they carry all of it. I want you to understand what 4 hours of that is. It is not standing. Standing is what you do in a queue. This is holding your whole body as still as carved stone, while the blood pools in your feet and the small of your back becomes a slow fire and a cold wind off the wet stone climbs your spine. And you do not shift. You do not blink more than a man must. You do not let the weight of the bearskin pull your chin up off your hands by even a hair, because the hair would show, and the dead man is watching, and his people are watching, and the honor is in the not moving. It is the hardest easy thing in the world. From across the forecourt it looks like nothing. Up close it is everything a soldier has. Kesp did not come up close. Kesp stayed under his colonnade, and for the first half hour he murmured into a telephone, and I caught fragments, arrangements, the airfield, a complaint about a delayed flight, the small busy noise of a man who has decided the important things are elsewhere. Twice he looked at his watch. Once he laughed low at something the voice on the telephone said, and the laugh fell into that quiet forecourt like a dropped coin, and I saw the muscle move along the jaw of one of my younger guardsmen at the catafalque, a flash of anger crossing him, and I willed it down with my eyes, and he mastered it. Ren did not move at all. I do not think the laugh reached him. I think by then, Ren was somewhere the laugh could not go. It was the old woman who changed the morning. She came to the rail at the edge of the forecourt perhaps 40 minutes in, a small woman in a dark coat with a headscarf knotted under her chin, and she carried something wrapped in a cloth, held against her chest the way you hold a thing you have carried a long way. She was not on any list. The constable at the rail moved to turn her gently away, and she said something to him I could not hear, and he looked at her face, and then he looked at me, and he did the right thing, the thing that is not in any protocol, and he let her stand. She did not weep. She stood at the rail and looked at the pale blue flag on the coffin of a man she had never met, and her lips moved, and I understood that she was praying, and not in our language. She had heard, the way the old hear these things, that a soldier was passing through who had drowned saving strangers, and she had come, I learned this later, because her own son had drowned 40 years before in our own Navy, and had never come home at all, and she had decided, in whatever calculus the bereaved keep, that she would stand for this foreign boy as she had never been able to stand for hers. Kesp saw her too. I watched him see her. And here is the thing that hardened my resolve for the whole rest of that morning. He turned to his liaison and he said, with a small fastidious frown, "Can we not keep the public back? This is a state movement, not a public viewing. It looks untidy." Untidy. A grieving mother at a rail, and the word the man reached for was untidy. I went to the rail myself. I did not move the old woman. I stood beside her for a moment, this small woman and this officer in his finery, and I asked her quietly, in the few words of her own tongue I could find, whether she would like to stay. She looked up at me, surprised that I had the words at all, and she nodded, and she touched my sleeve once with 2 fingers, and then she went back to her praying, and I went back to my post, and something in me had settled hard as a stone. This was no longer transit. Whatever the man under the colonnade believed, a mother had come to a rail and made it a funeral. An hour in, the first of the visitors of rank arrived, an old general of our own army, retired, who had heard on the morning news that a serving soldier was lying in honor at the old Mews, and who had put on his uniform, every medal of it, and come down without being asked. He did not announce himself. He came to the edge of the forecourt, and he stood, and when he had stood long enough he came slowly forward to the catafalque, and he stopped before the head of the coffin, before Ren, and he brought his old hand up in a salute so slow, and so exact that it seemed to take a year, and he held it, an old soldier saluting a young one across the whole distance of nations and of death. Ren could not return it. A man in the vigil does not return salutes. His stillness is his salute, given already and entire. But I saw the old general understand that. I saw him hold his salute 3 full seconds longer than custom, as if to say, "I know what it costs you not to answer me, and I honor that too." And then he stepped back, and he saw the old woman at the rail, and he crossed the whole forecourt to her, an old general in his medals, and he stood beside her at the rail like a son, and the 2 of them, strangers, kept the vigil together. I looked then at Kesp. He had stopped using his telephone. He was watching the old general and the old woman, and I could not read his face, but I saw that the easy contempt had gone out of his posture, and that he was, for the first time that morning, simply standing still and looking, which is the beginning, in every man, of being moved. It was not the end of him. A man does not unmake his certainty in an hour. Near the 90-minute mark he came to me, brisk again, and said the flight had been moved up, that we would need to shorten the vigil and bring the coffin to the cars early. I told him the flight had not been moved up. I had the airfield's own word. He had invented the flight to cut the ceremony short, because the ceremony had begun to do something to him that he did not want done. I said evenly that the honors would be rendered in full, that I served the household and the household's word, and that his car would be ready at the appointed hour and not a minute before. He held my eyes for a moment, and I held his, and there was no anger in it, only the meeting of two men who both knew exactly what was happening and why. "It is only a soldier," Kesp said at last, and I heard under it that he was no longer sure of his own sentence. "Yes, sir," I said, "it is a soldier. There is nothing higher we receive through that gate." He had no answer to that, and he went back to his colonnade, and the rain that had held all morning finally let go, not a downpour, a fine cold drift of it, the kind that soaks a man slowly and is worse for being gentle. And Wren, at the head of the coffin in the rain, did not move. The rain is where I should tell you what I knew about Wren that the rest of them did not, because the rain is when it began to matter. Years before he came to the household, Wren had served somewhere far away and very wet, in a place where rivers came up overnight and took whole roads, and he had been the man they sent when the water came. I had pieced this together over the years from the small things a careful man cannot quite hide, the way he watched the gutters fill, the way he could not be made to flinch at the sound of fast water, a single line in a file I was not supposed to read about a citation for pulling men off a flooded causeway with a rope around his own waist. He had done, in his own younger years, exactly the thing that Teo Vasari of Servain had died doing. He had gone into the water for strangers. The difference between them was only that the water had given Wren back. So when I say Wren was somewhere the laugh could not go, I will tell you now where I think he was. I think he was standing in two places at once. He was standing in the wet forecourt of the old mews in his bearskin and his reversed rifle, and he was standing on a flooded causeway 20 years gone, with the brown water roaring at his knees, watching a younger version of himself reach for one more hand. He was not honoring a stranger. By the second hour, I do not believe Teo Vasari was a stranger to him at all. He was honoring the man he might have become if the river had taken him too. The man on the catafalque was every soldier who had gone into the water and not come back out, and Wren had decided to stand for all of them in the body of this one. That is why he did not move. Not because the discipline was iron, though it was. Because the duty was personal in a way no order could have made it. The rain thickened. It ran off the curve of the bearskin and down the back of Wren's neck and under his collar, and I knew the cold of that, the particular misery of cold water finding the one warm channel down your spine, and I knew that his feet inside his boots had gone past pain into that dead heavy numbness that makes a man afraid he will sway when he tries to march off. 2 hours of vigil already, in the wet, and 2 more to go, and he had not so much as blinked the rain out of his eyes when it gathered on his lashes. He let it run. He let it run down his still face like the thing none of us were permitting ourselves, and from the rail it must have looked, to the old woman and the old general and the gathering crowd, as though the guard at the head of the coffin was weeping for a man he had never met. Perhaps he was. I have never asked him. There are questions you do not put to a man like Wren, and that is the chief one. The crowd had grown. That is the thing about this city, about people anywhere. I think word moves and the right people come. By the second hour the rail was 3 and 4 deep, office workers on their break, an old soldiers' association that had heard and come in their berets and their medals, a knot of schoolchildren with a teacher who had the sense to bring them and the better sense to keep them silent. None of them knew Teo Vasari. All of them had come to stand for him. The pale blue flag with its white river snapped once in a gust, and a low sound went through the crowd, not a gasp, something gentler, the sound a great many people make when they are all moved at the same moment, and none of them wants to be the one to break the quiet. Kesp watched it grow. I made a point now of watching him. The contempt was long gone. What was on his face by the second hour was something more complicated and more honest. A kind of confusion, the look of a man whose entire understanding of a situation is coming apart in his hands, and who does not yet know what to replace it with. He had come believing he was supervising a formality, a tidy bit of transit to be got through and reported as completed. And the people of a foreign country had filled a forecourt in the rain to honor a corporal of his own nation that he himself had been too small to honor, and he was beginning, I think, to be ashamed. He came to me a third time. I expected another invented flight, another attempt to cut it short. Instead, he stood beside me a while in silence, watching Wren, and when he spoke his voice had changed. "Why does he not move?" Kesp asked. Not a complaint this time, a genuine question, almost a plea. 4 men could share that post. He has stood the head the whole time. Why does that one man not move? I considered how much to tell him. In the end, I told him very little because it was not mine to tell, and because the little was enough. "Because he has been in the water," I said. "Where your corporal was, he came out. Your corporal didn't. He stands for the difference." Kesp looked at me, and then he looked at Wren, and I watched the last of his certainty go. He did not speak again for a long while. But he took a step forward, out from under the dry colonnade, into the edge of the rain, and he stood there getting wet with the rest of us. And it was a small thing, and it was everything, and I let him have it without remark, because a man's first honest step toward grief should not be commented on. It was at the 2-hour 40 mark that the trouble came. A car I had not been told about pulled up at the gate, a long official car, flying a pennant I half recognized, and out of it came a man of considerable rank from the Servian mission, Kesp's own superior, a deputy minister named Hollis Brant, who had flown in for the airfield ceremony and decided to look in on the transit on his way through. He was the kind of important man who is always slightly impatient with the time the world takes, and he came across the forecourt with 2 aides and a stride that did not slow for the catafalque. And he wanted, I gathered before he had finished his first sentence, to move things along. "We're behind," Brant said to me, not bothering with my name. "The minister's schedule won't bend. Bring the coffin to the cars now, officer. We'll do the rest at the field." And there it was, the order I had been waiting for since the gray morning began, not from the small man under the colonnade, but from a great one with the authority to make it stick. Move the coffin, cut the vigil, trade an old soldier's death for a minister's schedule. Brant outranked everyone in that forecourt who could have stopped him, and he knew it, and he had already half-turned to signal the cars. I looked at Wren, still as stone at the head of the coffin, the rain running down his face, 2 hours and 40 minutes into a 4-hour vigil he had asked for. And I knew that if I obeyed the deputy minister, I would be marching that good man off his post early, in front of the old woman and the old general and the silent children and the whole rain-soaked crowd, and that something would break in that forecourt that I would not be able to mend. I had a decision to make, and perhaps a career to lose, and about 4 seconds to do it in. I will tell you what I did, and I am not proud of it the way you might expect, because it was not brave in the way men think brave looks. I did not raise my voice. I did not refuse. A guardsman does not win these things by refusing. He wins them the way Wren was winning his, by being so plainly, so unanswerably correct that refusal becomes the other man's only ugly option. "Sir," I said to the deputy minister, "the vigil has 80 minutes to run. Your corporal will be carried to the cars at the appointed hour, with full honors before this crowd who have come in the rain to see your nation's son honored. I can have him in the cars in 90 seconds if you order it. But I will need you to give that order out loud here, in front of them, so that they understand it was the Republic of Servian that chose to cut short the honors for its own fallen, and not the household that failed to render them." Brant looked at me. Then he looked for the first time at the crowd, really looked, the way Kesp had finally looked at the old woman. He took in the 4-deep rail, the berace and the medals of the Old Soldiers' Association, the silent children, the old woman with her wrapped bundle held to her chest, the old general standing beside her in all his decorations. He took in the cameras. There were cameras now. The city's news had come, and a man of his rank reads a camera the way a sailor reads a sky. And he understood. in about the same 4 seconds I had spent on my decision, that I had just handed him a choice between his minister's schedule and his nation's honor, in front of every lens in the capital, and that there was only one way that choice could be reported. "No," Brant said quietly. "No, of course not. Let it run its course." And then he did a thing I had not expected, and that I have thought about many times since. He turned to his aides and dismissed them back to the cars. He took off, of all things, his hat. And the deputy minister of the Republic of Servin walked out into the rain, to the foot of the catafalque, and stood at attention before the coffin of a corporal he had been about to hurry into a car, and stayed there, bareheaded, for the rest of the vigil. Whatever Brant had been before he crossed that forecourt, the forecourt had made something different of him. I have seen it do that to better men and worse. There is a power in a thing done rightly that reaches across rank and nation, and a man's own intentions, and takes hold of him whether he consents or not. Kesp came and stood beside his minister. Neither of them spoke. The two officials of Servin who had arrived believing this was a formality stood bareheaded in our rain before their own dead, and learned what their corporal was worth from the stillness of a foreign guardsman, and I do not think either of them was ever quite the same official afterward, and I count that among the things Wren did that morning without saying a word. The vigil ran on toward its end. 3 hours, 3 hours and a quarter. The rain eased, then stopped, and a thin, watery light came through, and the wet stone of the forecourt began to gleam, and it was, I will say it plainly, beautiful, the kind of grave, gray beauty this country does better than any place I know, a beauty made entirely of restraint. And it was in that thinning light, with perhaps half an hour of the vigil left to run, that the old woman at the rail did the thing that broke us all. She had stood for 2 hours and more. She was a small old woman, and she had stood in the rain the whole time without complaint, and now she unwrapped the bundle she had carried against her chest, and I saw what it was, and my throat closed. It was a wreath, a small plain wreath, the kind you make yourself when you cannot afford to buy one, woven of the late flowers from a window box, white and pale blue, and I understood with a lurch that she had known the colors. She had found out the colors of Servin, this old woman who had lost her own son to the sea 40 years ago, and was never given a grave to bring flowers to. And she had sat up the night before weaving a wreath in the colors of a country she would never see, for a boy she would never know, because no one had been able to do it for her boy, and she would not let it go undone for this one. She held it to the constable at the rail. She could not reach the catafalque herself. It was beyond the line, and the line was the line. She held it out, and her lips moved, and the meaning was plain in every language there is. Please, let this reach him. The constable looked at me. The whole forecourt, I felt, looked at me. Protocol said the line held. Protocol said no member of the public approached the catafalque. Protocol said a great many sensible things that protected the dignity of the dead. And I stood there, an officer of the household, weighing 2 hours of perfect order against a wreath in an old woman's hands, and I will tell you that I was about to do the correct thing, the protocol thing, the thing that was safe. I was about to nod the constable into a gentle refusal. When Wren moved, he had been still for 3 hours and a half. I had watched him not move through a foreign attaché's laughter and a deputy minister's order and a long cold rain, and now, with the old woman's wreath held out across the line, and the whole forecourt holding its breath, Corporal Aldous Wren lifted his chin from his hands. It was the smallest thing. To anyone who had not stood the vigil it would have looked like nothing, a man straightening from a long stoop. But to every soldier there, and there were many, it was the breaking of an absolute, and a low sound went through the crowd, and I felt my own heart stop, because I did not know yet what he meant to do. And a guardsman who breaks his vigil for the wrong reason has thrown away everything, and I could not have stopped him if he had. He did not break it for the wrong reason. Wren brought himself fully upright, slow, exact, every inch of it disciplined, no haste, no stumble, though I knew his feet were dead under him and his back was on fire. He shouldered his reversed rifle and brought it to the order with a movement so clean it rang. And then he turned, this guardsman, and he marched, the slow march, the full ceremonial slow march, the one that takes a lifetime to learn and a morning like this to mean, from the head of the coffin to the edge of the line where the old woman stood. He stopped before her. He was a tall man and she was a small woman, and he looked down at her across the rail, and for one moment two strangers looked at each other, and the whole distance between a guardsman and a grieving mother was nothing at all. And then Corporal Wren, who did not have leave to do it, who had every regulation in the household against him, came to attention before her, and he reached out in his white gloves, and he took the wreath from her hands as gently as if it were the man himself. She let it go. Her hand stayed open in the air a moment after, the way hands do when they have carried a thing a long way and have at last been allowed to set it down. Wren turned again. He carried the wreath the length of that forecourt at the slow march, alone in the watery light, and not one person made a sound, and the only thing moving in all that place was a guardsman bearing an old woman's flowers to a foreign coffin. He reached the catafalque. He stopped at the head, in his own vigil position, the place he had held for 3.5 hours, and he bent, slowly, with that same impossible control, and he laid the small handmade wreath of white and pale blue at the head of the coffin of Corporal Tio Vasari of the Serving Republican Engineers, who had drowned bringing strangers out of the water. Then he straightened. He brought his white-gloved hand up in a salute, and this he was not permitted either. A man at the vigil does not salute. His stillness is his salute. But he saluted, slow and exact, and held, a soldier to a soldier, the living to the dead, our nation to theirs, and he held it, while the rain-light came down on the pale blue flag and the handmade wreath. And then he lowered his hand, and he grounded his rifle, and he set his chin once more upon his hands, and he was a statue again, as though he had never moved at all, except that now there were flowers at the head of the coffin that an old woman had made through the night, and every soul in that forecourt had seen a foreign guardsman carry them there. I have stood at a great many ceremonies. I have never heard a silence like the one that followed. It was not empty. It was full to the brim, the silence of several hundred people all undone at once and all holding it, for the dead man's sake, because to weep aloud would have been to make it about themselves. The old general at the rail was the first to break it, and he broke it correctly. He came to attention beside the old woman, and he saluted the coffin and held it. And then the Old Soldiers' Association came to attention, the whole knot of them, berets and medals and old straight backs, and saluted. And then, because they did not know the form and reach for the only honor they had, the schoolchildren put their small hands over their hearts. The office workers took off their hats. The deputy minister and the attaché, bareheaded already, bowed their heads. The old woman put her empty hands together and finished her prayer. And Tio Vasari, who had died 3 seas from home and was passing through a country that was not his, lay in honor under a foreign sky with foreign flowers at his head, and a foreign guardsman standing the rest of his vigil for him. And I do not think any soldier of any nation has ever been better honored, and he was not even ours. The vigil ran out its last half hour. When the appointed time came, the bearer party slow marched on, 8 men of the household, and they took up the coffin of the serving corporal onto their shoulders for the last carry, and Wren slow marched at the head, the wreath riding on the flag where he had laid it. They carried him out through the gate of the old mews to the waiting cars with full state honors, the rifles reversed, the slow tread on the wet stone, and the crowd parted in silence to let them pass, and the old woman reached out as the coffin went by and touched the corner of the pale blue flag with 2 fingers, the same 2 fingers she had touched my sleeve with, and then drew them back and pressed them to her own lips. At the cars, the thing happened that I keep, of all of it, nearest. The deputy minister Brandt came to me before he got into his car. The brisk, impatient man of 3 hours before was gone entirely. He took my hand in both of his, and he could not at first find his voice, and when he found it he said only, "I came to hurry him through. I will tell them at home, I will tell them what your people did for our boy. They will not believe me. I do not entirely believe it myself." And then he said, lo, the thing I think he had crossed the whole forecourt and the whole morning to be able to say, "We do not honor our own so well as you have honored a stranger. I am ashamed, and I am grateful, and I will not forget it." I told him the only true thing there was to tell him. He was not a stranger to the man at the head of the coffin, sir, not by the end, and he is not a stranger to any of us now. You leave him better company than you found. Kesp said nothing to me at all. But as he turned to go he stopped before Wren, who had fallen out and come to attention at the gate as the cars loaded, and the glossy attaché who had wanted to tell the guardsman he might stand at ease when the cameras were off looked at that man for a long moment, and then he bowed to him. A full bow, from the waist, the bow you give a thing greater than yourself. And Wren returned it with the smallest inclination of his head, one soldier accepting another man's surrender to the truth. And that was the whole of what passed between them, and it was more than enough. The cars pulled away. The crowd did not disperse for a long time. The old woman stayed at the rail until the last car was gone, and then she folded her empty cloth and turned to go, and the old general gave her his arm, and the two of them walked out of the forecourt together, the mother who had lost her son to our sea and the general who had come down in his medals for a stranger, and I never learned either of their names, and I have stopped minding that. Some honors are better for being anonymous. They belong to no one, which is to say they belong to everyone. I found Wren at the guardroom afterward. He had got his boots off, finally, and was sitting with his ruined feet in a basin, and his face had gone back to giving nothing away, and I sat down across from him, and for a while neither of us spoke, the way men who have stood near something large do not always need to speak. "You broke your vigil," I said at last. It was not an accusation. I needed to hear what he would say. Wren was quiet a moment. Then he said, "No, sir, I kept it. The vigil's for the man. The flowers were for the man." He looked at the basin, at his own feet, at the long-ago rivers, perhaps. "She made them in the night, sir, in his colors. For a boy she never met because nobody ever made any for hers." He shook his head once slow. "I wasn't going to let those flowers be turned away. Not for any protocol that ever was. Some things a man stands for and some things he moves for. The trick is knowing which is which. I have carried that sentence with me ever since. Some things a man stands for and some things he moves for, and the whole of honor is in knowing which is which." We did not speak of it again. Wren and I, there was no need. But I will tell you what I believe, having stood that morning and watched it, that the flag they handed me at the gate was not ours, and it did not matter in the slightest. That a soldier is a soldier, and the dead are the dead, and a country shows what it truly is not by how it honors its own. Any country will do that, but by how it honors a stranger who can never thank it and can never repay it and will be 3 seas gone by nightfall. We stood for theirs as we would have stood for our own. We stood for theirs better than some stand for their own. And somewhere across 3 seas, in a town I will never see, an old engineer's mother was told that her drowned son passed through a foreign kingdom on his way home, and was not hurried through as cargo, but was kept and watched over and crowned with handmade flowers by a guardsman who had once been in the water himself. And I am told she keeps that telling like a lamp, and that it has never gone out. That is the whole of it. The flag was not ours. The honor was. And the man who taught me the difference is back at his post this morning, still as stone, giving nothing away, waiting for whatever comes through the gate next, ours or not, to be received as it deserves.